I'm glad that you came. We're going to talk this morning about developing the conductor's dream, how score study and spending some time with the music itself will influence our rehearsals. And we're going to use, later on today in my session on efficient and effective rehearsals, the same music that we will talk about this morning, and then we'll rehearse it this afternoon with the group. And hopefully there'll be enough people there to actually sing it and see how that has affected what we do this morning, how that would affect what we do in this session and beyond. I would encourage us to look for just a minute at the bibliography that was passed out. I wanted to highlight just a few things. There are lots and lots of possibilities on here. Things that might be apropos to you, but other things that might not be. But I just want to point out a few that I think are really helpful. On the first page under vocal technique, the Davids, Julia Davids and Stephen Latour book. It's quite new. It came out in 2012. Excuse me. Vocal Technique and Guide for Conductors, Teachers, and Singers. It's a really wonderful new book. Julia is a singer and a conductor, and she comes at the perspective on this book is as a singer in a choral rehearsal. What does a singer need in a choral rehearsal? How can we effectively communicate with singers in not only their jargon, but also in a way that allows a singer to sing healthily and long-term in choral rehearsals? I wish I would have had that book when I started conducting many years ago. I think it's a very good resource. Julia is on the faculty at North Park University in Chicago and is a wonderful singer herself. On the second page, there are a couple of videos that I would encourage you to look at. The Charlotte Adams, Davey worked out for a beautiful voice. I don't know of a better video for women's voices. In dealing with women's voices, Charlotte is fantastic. Charlotte's in Baylor. And the women that she worked with, her high school women, are fantastic. So I would really highly recommend that video. I have a video on there as well, working with male voices, so both of those can, I hope, be helpful to you. There are lots of other videos and so many resources on YouTube that are available to us now. I hesitate to highlight too many. Sandra Snow's new video in 2009 called Conducting Teaching is a wonderful addition as well. If you haven't looked at any of those Shaw videos, Robert Shaw videos preparing a masterpiece, watch him rehearse Elijah or watch him rehearse Misa Solemnity, very recommended. It's just wonderful to get inside his head and watch how he related to singers and the pacing of the rehearsals and the rhythmic intensity of those rehearsals. I think it's a good reminder to us. The web resources on page 3 were probably out of date when I typed them, so, but it can lead you down a path that maybe you didn't know didn't know too much about Course America, what Course America was, for instance, or lots of other those possibilities. So I take it as a jumping off place and head out from there. Under repertoire resources, it's somewhat out of date, but John Navarro's choral settings of the scriptures with English texts can be a good jumping off place too. It's arranged in biblical order with, anthems suggested for certain biblical passages. So that if you know what the biblical passage is, it's a good place to start. So much, of course, has been written since then, so many anthems and so on, but in terms of traditional anthems, it can be a good place for help. Going on. If you do things with choir and orchestra or instrumentalists, say Holy Gloria, or we could go on forever if you do For I Requiem or whatever. The David Daniels book under choral orchestral issues is very, very helpful. Especially, it's called Orchestral Music and Handout. And you might say, why is he talking about orchestral music? Because in the back of the book are lists arranged this way. The large orchestra, and it will be SATB chorus, large orchestra, 5 to 10 minutes, 10 minutes to 20 minutes, 20 minutes to 30 minutes. Medium-sized orchestra, 5 to 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes. A small orchestra, 5 to 10 minutes, which is very, very helpful. Because you might say, I have a choir of 25 people. I want to do something with string orchestra, and it will be listed that way. Or you might say, I have a choir of 40 people. I would really like to see what we might be able to do, say a Bach cantata, or something like Mendelssohn, or whatever, Vivaldi, whatever. Very, very helpful. And then not only does it list the names of the pieces, it also will tell you how long they are, who publishes them, and what's the instrumentation. Oh, okay, I will need 2 oboes for that piece, or I don't need any oboes for that. Very helpful resource. That is also online. I think it's a subscription online, so maybe your local music library or local library might have a subscription to the Orchestral Music Handbook. Certainly a lot of music libraries would have that available, but it is available in just book form as well. I consulted so many times because I am in charge of a choir that our graduate conductors conducted. It's a choir of 24, and I'm constantly looking for things for them to do with instruments. And this is really, really helpful. Under conducting, James Jordan's choral singing step-by-step 11 concise lessons for individual or choral ensemble use. I think it's terrific. It's quite new, published in 2011. It's a little bit like here, the rules of the game. Really helpful for novices, novice conductors, or novice choral singers, or people who have experience, but it's very helpful. It's a good reminder, I think, of what we do. Under choral literature, of course, in terms of just a big picture of all the choral repertoire, is Dennis Schrock's new book, Choral Repertoire, published in 2009. Every important composer in choral music is there by era and nationality, with discussions about them and their output, and then a list of important works that they've written into that. Very, very helpful. Choral techniques and resources. Robert Blocker's the Robert Shaw Reader. If you don't know that book, it's a book that simply quotes Shaw's letters and Shaw's writings and so on. And it's a little like the Daily Dozen. It's not a beach read. It's not something that you'll just read for sit down and read the whole book. But bit by bit, and whenever I read the Shaw Reader, I'm always encouraged because he gets so frustrated with people who skip rehearsals. I feel so good when people skip Robert Shaw's rehearsals. That's fantastic. So I feel justified that I want that as well, and I also feel in partnership with someone who is really terrific. Barbara Harlow's book, The Art and Science of Playing a Choral Concert. I think it's a terrific. Barbara owns Santa Barbara Music, if you know that publishing. There are also resources there. If you're doing anything in foreign languages, the translation books of the German, the Latin, the French, and the Hebrew, those books are listed there too. Have saved all of us a lot of time. And not only translations, but also what I find particularly helpful is background information and where did the text for the maps come from? Where did Seafood Cherubs, where did that text come from? It's very helpful. And then under aesthetics, I would particularly recommend Stacey Horn's book, Imperfect Harmony, Finding Happiness Singing with Others. It was published, came out about 2 weeks ago. And published in 2013, getting my age right. It published in 2013, and her premise is that life is better when you sing in choirs. And she was, I first heard of this book from an NPR interview in which she was profiled. And she was going through a very difficult time in life. And she happened to be walking on the street in New York, and she saw that there was a choir that was going to rehearse, and she said, I should do that. That should help. And it changed her life. And many of us could say stories over and over again of lives that have been changed by singing together. And she sees it as a healing experience to sing together in choirs. Since that interview, since I read that interview, which was probably about a month ago, there was an article published about heart rates, that heart rates begin to be synced by singing in choirs. We breathe together. We breathe in basically the same amount of time because we sing a whole phrase together. Heart rates begin to be aligned for people who sing in choirs. And another article that came out that said singing in choirs is better for you than yoga. So, for my people, my friends who are devoted yoga-ees, is that a word? I'm not sure. Yoga-ites. I'd just like to let them know that I'm not all bad, that I don't do yoga, that I actually sing in a choir, and that it can be helpful. I think that we sometimes overlook, those of us in the game, sometimes overlook helping others find the benefits of that. It's not just because we're making notes and rhythms happen and text happen at the same time, but it's also what happens in that whole experience that can make our lives better. So I leave that with you and let you use it as you wish. I frequently say that the greatest conductors are those with the greatest imaginations. I firmly believe that. It's not the weirdest imaginations, it's not the most off the edge imaginations, but the greatest conductors are those who approach choral music or orchestral music or piano or singing with an imagination that's not only based on what is in the score itself, but what they bring to experiences, what they've heard before, how they imagine that it could happen. The greatest conductors are those with the greatest imaginations or with the most developed imaginations, because imaginations can be developed. I also believe that great rehearsals are the result of the conductor's score-based imagination, score-based dream. You come to a rehearsal and it becomes alive and engaging and interesting and focused because of the mental images that we bring to that rehearsal, in which we say, how could it be different than what the sound that I'm hearing in my head already that I would like for the choir to mention? Great rehearsals are the result of the dissatisfaction with okay, a dissatisfaction with good. I'd love for you to join me in what I'm imagining, how this could sound, and the communication of what we were singing last night, instinct, scorn, and crave. Those imagination words, those color words that bring us to someplace other than just put the V on B3, the S right before the beat. Great rehearsals are the result of the conductor's overwhelming desire to match the sound she or he hears in their head to the sound he or she imagines. So I said that a little backwards. The sound that you hear coming back to what you already imagined. So how do we build this score-based dream? How do we build an imagination based on what's in front of us? And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. How do we and then progress from imagination through improvisation? Because great rehearsals are improvised, are thought about, are planned and focused and all of those sort of things, but then improvised. Just as a great jazz musician doesn't start from scratch, a great jazz musician can play a scale in every key, would know all of the progressions in all of the keys, and then it suddenly becomes the possibility of improvising in that mode. That's what we do in rehearsal. How do we progress from imagination through improvisation to inspiration? Which is what we would like to have happen in the worship service or in the concert. How does it come alive? We have lived with it for weeks in the rehearsal. Our singers have lived with it a long time. But those folks who listen to it for the very first time, how do we bring it alive to them in a way that says what we want it to say? So, I like to use a little anagram here. A little anagram called listen. And first is learn the score. What do we mean by learn the score? What's involved in learning the score? Well, it might, and probably does, pay attention to the structure of the piece. Is it strophic? Which a lot of our music in the church is going to be strophic, because a lot of it will be based on hymn tune, with a stanza of text and another stanza of text. Or is it ADA? Or is it something a little more complex than that? What's the structure? I very much encourage us to look from the big to the little, from the big picture, maybe the rest to the little, which is absolutely opposite of the way that I would like to do it. Because as a pianist, I would love to play from the beginning to the end, dig in to make every phrase beautiful if possible. I'd like to shape every one as I go. And that doesn't see the big picture that I'm living in every phrase. Living in every phrase is okay. But at the beginning, I really believe the best is to see the big picture. The best is to zoom out in your Google Maps and to see the state that you're looking at before you zoom in to the street and the house that you really want to follow. All right? That's not the easiest thing to do sometimes. It's seeing the forest. It's if you're driving to Colorado, and I grew up in northern Kansas, so when we would drive to Colorado, when you cross the state line, you should see the mountains, which is never the case, right? If you drive to Colorado, they're way ahead of you. There's a lot of Colorado before you see the mountains, let me tell you. So when you see those mountains, that's the big picture. And it's a long time before you actually get to walk down trails. That's what we're talking about in this. It's absolutely the opposite of GPS. Because in GPS it says turn left in 500 feet. We have no idea what's coming up after that. You have no idea what's coming up before that, but you know that at exactly that moment. That's the opposite of a wonderful way to study a score, I believe. For those of us of a certain age who remember when you used to print out the MapQuest directions, you know, that you could never read when you were driving at night because it was too dark in the car and the print was too small. Well, now we don't have to do it because Jill can yell at us from our GPS on it. Turn, you idiot. Anyway, so analyze big to little, structure, overall structure. Phrase lengths. Now we're getting to a little smaller. Is this a 4-bar phrase? Is this a 6-bar phrase? Is this a 3-bar phrase? Well, if it is, then you have a real good possibility of messing up. Because in a 3-bar phrase, we're not used to that. We're used to 4-bar phrases and 2-bar phrases, but once in a while there's a 5-bar phrase. So maybe that is why the choir doesn't want to sing that so correctly. Or maybe that's why you forget to bring in the soloist at that time, because that phrase is a little bit longer. What about the textual musical interplay? Is there a reason that when the word scorn was said, for example, that the harmony was the way it was? Is there a reason that on the word crave, the harmony was the way it was? Is there a reason why the composer at that moment went into polyphonic texture as opposed to a homophonic texture? Those are the sort of interplay now that we begin to live with and say, what is the composer saying, number one? And number two, what can I say through what the composer has given us? The interplay of music, and maybe there isn't much interplay of music and text. Certain styles, certain eras, certain time periods will have less one-to-one correlation. Other time periods will have absolute one-to-one correlation. Or is it a bigger picture correlation? Is this entire section dealing with keys, and therefore the music is a calm texture or calm harmonic language during that time? Or is this whole section, if you know one of the choruses in creation, convulsion, rage and terror, is there a reason why all of those loops happen in that very dramatic music? Interplay of music and text. If it's in a foreign language, how about the translation? If it hasn't been given to you. How about editing it? I find that's one of, I love that process personally, and maybe it's just because of meetings I like to fill in the O's and fill in the B's, all right? But I love the process of editing. I'd love to figure out where all of the final consonants happen. Put the rests in. Put the breath marks in. Absolutely figure it out. If we would have had more time last night in The Heavens Are Telling, there would have been a lot of edits put in that score so that we would all know exactly where those keys are going to line up and suddenly realize that sopranos and basses, even in that polyphonic texture in the unit, are here, are doing this together and lining up and entering together. The tenors are entering a bar ahead of everybody else, and that has a very remarkable musical moment to bring that to come alive in that sort of way. It could be that if we edited beautifully the offertory at the beginning, that we would say to the sopranos, your mezzo piano and everybody else's piano, or your mezzo forte and everybody else's piano, which will help in balance issues. Editing in such a way of articulating consonants, maybe it has to do with dynamic markings, maybe it has to do with staccatos, tenutos, and so on. I am a firm believer in this. Do we mark every note? No. Do we mark certain things so that they carry through a certain section? Absolutely. And if there are possibilities of having the singers do that, of having them put into their score, insisting they put those things in their score. Pencils are their friends. They don't have to be just sharpened and put in their ear, no, on top of their ears. But they really can be used to mark everything that we talk about. We might want to know something about the composer's background. Say every ring of Vivaldi, Gloria. Maybe we want to know something about where was Vivaldi during that time. Who sang it? Do we really know it was sung by women? Yes. All of it? Yes. The low C's? Yes. We do know the low D's because it's in D major. There's a reason it's in D major, because it was sung by women. And there were women who had low D's. And so it was not an SATB piece, it was a women's piece originally. We do know that sort of thing, but that's very interesting. It's very interesting, I think, to know that most of these women were orphans, that were living in an orphanage, and many of them were deformed because sexually transmitted disease were rampant in Venice at the time, and their mothers had given them up when they were born with these deformities, given them up to the orphanage, but many of them were incredibly talented and incredibly beautiful singers. And many of their performances were given behind screens so that no one had to look at them, but could hear these incredibly beautiful sounds coming from up there. Well, that says something about this piece, and says something about his work with it. It also says something. Vivaldi was a great violinist, a great string player. Many of these young women became very fine violinists because of his work with them. Those sort of things are helpful to us to know what sort of emotion to bring to the piece. If we're doing a Bach cantata, say we're doing Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring, it would be interesting to know where was Bach at this, and why, if we could find out, which, given the internet today, we can find out almost everything there is to know about it, which is fantastic. And everything you read on the internet is true. It's important to know that. If it says Wikipedia, trust it. It's perfect. It's easy. But don't be afraid and my sense is that there are also people in our choirs who find that fascinating and be our allies in helping us find that sort of information. What about the history of the work? Say we were in Vivaldi, when did Vivaldi do it and why did he do it? Do we know anything about that? The questions I always encourage us to ask are who, what, why, when, and where. Who sang it? Who composed it? Who sang it? Who was it written for? Why? What is the piece about? What is the text about? Where did the text come from? Why was it written? And therefore, why do we do it? And what do we want to accomplish by doing this piece? And why did we choose this piece for this particular moment in time, or this moment in the service, or this moment in the concert? When was, if it's an old piece, maybe when was it first performed? Or if it's a new piece, if it was written yesterday, well, that's important. That will give us another perspective on how this piece might be done. The older the music, the less information we have about how it should be performed, and the newer the music, the less latitude we have in making choices. That's great. That's just how we live. If we're going to do, I did Bach B minor Mass for the first time last November. There are thousands of choices to do in the B minor Mass. How long, how short, how fast, who's most important at any given moment. Thousands of choices, but if I were doing a piece that was written yesterday, almost every one of those choices has been notated by the composer. It's just that those are just some of the differences between then and now. Next, still in the step of learning the score is learn the parts. Whether you need to be able to sing them or not, that's completely up to you. But what we need to know before we come to the first rehearsal is where the mistakes are going to be. If you make a mistake, somebody else is going to. If you make a mistake, somebody else is going to make a whole bunch more. Because you're the pro, and you're probably not going to make too many mistakes. But it just by singing through the piece or playing through the piece or looking even through the piece, you know, if there's a major third or minor third, you're going to mess up. It's just going to happen. It's just going to happen. If there's a third in the line, it's just not going to work. It's not going to be right the first time through. Chances are, often there are mistakes. So we figure that out. We bring and those knowledges then, that knowledge then becomes a help in aiding in an efficient and effective rehearsal. What is the harmonic language? As we study the score and look at the harmonic language, well, this is pretty common practice. This is standard practice. That's not going to be so difficult. The piece that we did at the end of the rehearsal last night is a little more adventurous. The harmonic language of that hymn tune setting last night is a little more adventurous. Therefore, we need to figure out, well, that contrapuntal section at the end is going to take a little more rehearsal time than the beginning, where it's in unison and answers back and forth. And then, as we learn the score, what's the big story? We're storytellers. We're not just conductors, but we tell stories. With the sounds that we make with the words, you know, when I first became a conductor a long time ago, somebody said, well, I'm a choral conductor because I love words. At that point, I didn't love words as much as I do now. I actually didn't realize how much I loved words. But we are choral conductors, I hope, because we love words. We love to tell stories through the sounds and the combination of sounds, which is remarkable. Okay, so I also encourage us to listen to recordings of the pieces that we have. There are very few new pieces written that do not have recordings on the publishing websites. Very few. And if I'm working with some composer to get a piece published, or if the publisher is looking at a piece, they'll say, we need a recording to put on the website. Well, that's fantastic. So those recordings can be helpful to us in generating an imagination, can be helpful to our choirs in generating their imagination to the piece as well. I'm a real proponent of listening to as many recordings as we can get our hands on of various pieces. I know people who say don't ever listen to a recording because you'll mimic the recording. Mimic great recordings. You can never do what a Robert Shaw did. He will be Robert Shaw. I hope I'm me, but we will do. I'd love to hear what a terrific financial planner would like to do with a retirement portfolio. I'd rather not just say, I wonder what I would do with it. Being not an expert at all, it would be really great to have someone who's an expert to get a little advice on any of these things. Okay, second, imagine. That's the next step. Imagine. How do you want it to sound? How do you want it to sound? That's our goal in this step. What's your dream for this piece? Let the text tell you a story, and then we tell a story to others. Nothing is ordinary. Nothing is overdone. Nothing is just there. It all becomes alive. We don't sing along with anything. I'm always a little frustrated and always a little surprised with sometimes when I work with young singers and it feels like we're singing along as opposed to making it come alive. We sing along all the time. Music in the radio, music in the stereo, music in our iPods. We sing along all the time, but when we're in the choral setting, we bring it alive. It is ours. It comes from within us. So we have to make it alive. Are there color words in each phrase, for instance? How about scorn and crave? Those are two color words. How about if we were singing the piece Sure on a Shiny Night? Sure, that's a color word. Shining is a color word. Night is a color word. Those are three color words in that very first phrase. The poet could have said, this shining night. Completely different connotation. Sure on this shining night. Just by saying the word sure says to me, could be either way. We have never experienced it this way before. This is a moment. Sure on this shining night. It also says to me that it's not a normal night. How could the night be normal if it's shining? Well, there are all sorts of possibilities. Jesu, joy of man's desiring. He didn't say, Jesu, Son of God, our heart's desire, but he says, Jesu, joy of man's desire. There's a couple of words. There's a word to bring alive in a way that says something important to the people that are listening. What do you want to say with those couple of words? Set the stage, set the costumes, set the lighting, set the lighting. And no choral singers in your choir, in my choir. First of all, I don't like to say my choir because it isn't my choir. I don't know. Believe me, I don't know. But what? If we're just choral singers, that's one thing. But if everyone is an actor or an actress, we bring that text alive in a different way. If we are not in an artificial way, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that says, this is what I am saying because of my experience. And I'm actually saying this, I'm actually telling you this story. Every note deserves our love. There are no unworthy notes or words. Every phrase deserves to be communicated. Every vowel needs to be unified. If there are 30 people in the choir, there are 30 vowel possibilities. And everyone is unworthy except one. And we'd like to unify on that one vowel sound that the conductor thinks is beautiful. There are no great choirs, only great conductors. There are no bad choirs, only bad conductors. That's absolutely true. I believe that with all my heart. And so to unify takes a conductor, a leader with imagination, because all of us will bring, everybody in the choir will bring perspective. We need to mark in this imagination. As we have edited before, we need to make sure that those markings are in our scores, to mark dynamics, to mark breaths. I also encourage us to fill our bank account with musical possibilities. As I mentioned about listening to recordings, do that. Fill our imagination account with possibilities. I'm not so great at imagining from a blank slate. I need possibilities. And having experienced a lot of things, we bring those perspectives to rehearsal. We all do. Listen to great bands, listen to great orchestras, listen to great choirs, sing to great choirs. I used to stand in the back of the symphony band rehearsals at the University of Michigan. The symphony band is so beautiful. And say, love for the choir or something. It's so in tune. It's so rich and velvety, and so everyone is breathing together. Everyone is imagining together. The sound is so beautifully balanced. And I one time said to a player, one of the players in the band, I said, why is it when you play for Professor X that it is always, because parenthetically, every single different conductor that I heard conduct the group was a different band. And one time, we had 5 different conductors conducting on the same concert with the Michigan Glee Club, and I was conducting the Glee Club a long, long time ago. And if there were 5 different conductors, there were 5 different Glee Clubs on the stage, because we are always faithful that we are, and a group will always sound different for a different conductor without the conductor saying anything. Not one of those conductors said, would you sing slightly out of tune for me? and the other ensemble did. Not one conductor said, would you sing that rather brashly for me? And yet it did. And not one conductor said, could that be warmer and rounder? And yet it was for that conductor. Just by how they spoke, just by how they walked on the podium, just by how they perhaps demonstrated for just a minute. Okay, so fill our musical account with possibilities. This is great. So I said to that kid, why is it that when you play for so-and-so, it's so beautiful? And he said, well, he simply expects us to play our very best all the time. And that was it. I mean, it wasn't that, well, he creates space, or his gestures are so effective, or whatever. It was just, when he stands up there, we just know we have to do our best. That's pretty great. It's not rocket science. but the bar was set in an inspirational, and this is who we are when we work on this story. Okay, so we develop an imagination, then we show it. Some of us stand in front of ensembles and conduct with our bodies. Some of us play behind the organ console. Some of us play behind the pianos. We will show the music no matter where we are. No matter where we are, we will show the music. We become the music. We show our dream. with our body. We are a gesture-based profession. We are leaders with our bodies, with our arms, with our hands, with our face. We demonstrate, they demonstrate. You were all brave last night in doing things, gestures, and songs that we worked on together that created a different sound, that created a more unified sound. We give a picture, they demonstrate. They reflect what we see. We give a picture of the sound that we measure. Conducting is the communication of musical ideas through pantomime, which conducting is. That's a pretty good definition. Then it's our goal to become that music with our body. If the music is gentle, then our bodies. If the music is articulate, then our bodies. If the music is dramatic, then our bodies should reflect that. We provide the motivation and they provide the sound. We become the sound. We show our dream with our bodies. Now here's a key point, and I hope you remember. We show our dream, we don't show what we're hearing. I hope we don't show what we're hearing. I hope we show our dream. I would say that's a lot easier to say than it is to do. Because when we hear things coming back that we don't particularly like, it's easy to become that, as opposed to become the answer. It could be in raising a child that yelling back is not the right way to go. But it's the easiest, but probably not the most effective. The same is true when we're conducting. To reflect what we imagine, all the while saying, okay, that needs to be softer, that needs to be more intense as we build that crescendo, showing them, rehearse, bring them back to us. And developing in them a sense that they actually can read your gesture, which then says that our gesture has to match the sound that we are imagining. Rod Eichenberger usually says, or often says, in his video, what they see is what you get. What they see is what you get. So if you're showing something, then that's what you get back. But I believe there's also a step before that, is what you think is what you show, is what they see, is what you get. So it's really what you're thinking that then will determine what you're showing. Does that make sense? It's a little stepping back a little further. So I guess as a conductor, it's important that we think the right things, that we live in the imagination sound. We don't live in it to the exclusion of what's going on around it, but we live in it in a way to show what we would really like to hear. We show our dream, not what we're hearing. And we say words. If we have to say words, and we do have to say words, we say words that evoke our imagination. For instance, could that sound like the back of your grandmother's hand? Could that be as gentle as that incredibly soft fur on the back of the hip? Could that be as dramatic as the puppy who stole your slipper? Something that evokes a color, that brings it alive. Okay, next step, transform. What you hear to what you'd like to hear. Transform what you hear to what you'd like to hear. Into what you imagine. Improve what comes back to you. And anything is fair game. We call this rehearsing. Anything is fair game. Maybe they need to walk. Maybe they need to stand. Maybe they need to sit. Maybe they need to use their arm. Maybe their posture needs to be better. Maybe their breath needs to be deeper. Maybe the vowel needs to have more shape. Maybe they need to inhale the pitch. Maybe they need to inhale the vowel. Anything is fair game. Every phrase deserves your attention. Does it have enough breath? Is the posture great? Is there height in the sound? Does it seem normal? If it seems normal, how can we make it seem more beautiful? Match your concept with the sound that returns to you. Maybe that has to do with vowel color. Maybe that has to do with diction. Maybe that has to do with intonation. Maybe it has to do with enunciation, how they're shaping it out. Maybe it has to do with you moving and they moving. I think sometimes simply standing and sitting can solve a million problems. Simply varying tempo can solve a million problems. 2 clicks faster on a metronome can make a piece work. 2 clicks slower on a metronome can make a piece work. And we can rehearse for hours and say, why is it always out of tune? And simply slowing it down a little bit might fix everything up. Or speeding up a little bit might fix everything up. Maybe the order of the rehearsal needs to be changed. Maybe it's not working because there were 2 slow pieces in a row. Or maybe it was because there were 2 fast pieces in a row. Or maybe it was because we started with a fast piece and we should have started with a slow piece to allow them to begin to concentrate more. All of that. Rehearsals are, we'll talk about this afternoon, but rehearsals are like great meals. We need to start with something and we need to progress to something else and we need to end with something. And we'll talk a little bit more about pacing of that. But we can accomplish a lot in the transformational stage by thinking along those lines. Maybe they are energetic, maybe they're not energetic, maybe it's been a difficult week for some people in the choir. You know, people come to rehearsals because they need something, or they want to get something out of it. What can we give them in this transformational process, which we call rehearsal, that will make their life better when they go home? That's our hope. Maybe there's a difference between rehearsing in a choir room and rehearsing in a sanctuary. We all know that. Maybe there's a difference between rehearsing on a concert stage and rehearsing in a choir room. Maybe if we simply went around that globe standing out in the lobby, the sound would be better than sitting out there. It would be. All of those, simply changing the venue, simply standing in a circle as opposed to sitting behind each other, can make a huge difference. We call that in rehearsal. You are engaged, they are engaged, physically, emotionally, intellectually, and vocally. All of that is part of what we do in the rehearsal process. And now with apologies to my third grade spelling teacher, Inspire. I couldn't come up with another one, so. What's that last step? The step that brings them alive for the people who are listening to it? As opposed, it's been brought alive to the people who are singing it. They've been bringing it alive for weeks before those who hear it. We, in the rehearsal process, have been singing it over and over, and we've finessed vowels, and we've finessed phrases, and we have lived with those words in a way that we took them home with us and couldn't get them out. I did a performance last week at Berkshire Choral Festival of Vaughan Williams' 5 Mystical Song. I can't get them out of my head. Love had me welcome, my soul. It's in my head forever. Could it be worse? No. I mean, could it be worse? Yes. Because those are some of the greatest words I know. We give that gift to the people who live in the ensembles that we conduct. So we put it all together. We finish it in this step. What does that mean? What it really means is that we begin it for the listeners. We finish it ourselves, but we begin it for the listeners who get to hear it once. And it has to be in a communicative, inspirational way that says to them, here's what I want you to hear. Here's the story. It needs to be gripping, it needs to be communicative, it needs to be burnished, it needs to be polished in some way. The choir becomes the music. They're not singing the music. They're not singing about the music. They become the music. There are no observers in this process, in the inspiration process. Nobody's standing by looking at it. In other words, the choir members are not just sort of engaged, they're fully engaged. They've savored every phrase. They've tasted every vowel. We hope. We hope they've connected with the text in a way that has meaning. There are no choral singers. There are only great actors and actresses who are engaged in every bit, projecting what it is. We're all ministers at that moment. Every member of the choir and the conductor and the players. We tell stories, communicate our faith. No one is passive in this process. All are engaged. So let's look a little bit at the Psalm 23, which I believe you picked up. And we're going to sing through, and then we're going to analyze it a little bit, and then talk about some imagination based on this piece. And then our time will be done. So stand up, if you wouldn't mind. Let's sing through a couple of these ways. I'll stand up here to the line. Okay. Good, great. Have a seat. Let's look at it now structurally. We'll rehearse this piece this afternoon and on the basis of the session this afternoon. Lots of. Would you play 195? Would you play 195? Isn't it rich? I can't help it every time I get it. Okay, so let's look at the big picture. If we approach this piece from the big picture, I imagine this as an ABA. So we have the big picture that goes from the very beginning, that goes all the way through the middle of page 9. It's really based on the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That whole first section is based on that, the extension of that text and that musical figure. And the B section begins at bar 54, which is the middle of page 9. We change keys, we change texture, the horn takes a little more predominance at that moment. We have men coming in, singing for a little bit by themselves, and so on. So that's the B section. And I then imagine the B section goes all the way through page 13, to the end of page 13. That triplet figure in the left hand, or in the right hand of the accompaniment is going throughout that. And at page 14, we have an abbreviated A coming back. The music is like that at the beginning. The Lord is my shepherd, and the Lord is my shepherd. And it feels a little coda-like, but it also feels like an abbreviated return of the A. So we know, therefore, it's a little off-kilter then. So we know the first section is the longest. The B section is not quite as long, but substantial. And the final A section is really quite short. Well, that tells us something about pacing of the piece. That tells us something about how the composer has imagined the pacing of the piece. It also, as we look at the text, we have to evaluate that, meaning, is all of the text, have we gotten all the way through Psalm 23 in the A section, or is there a reason why the B section happens? And is there a reason why he comes back to being, in the A section at page 14, we do come back to the beginning of that text, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then I don't believe the Lord is my shepherd forever is part of that text. I think there's a little interpolation there. So that's important for us to know that. And is the composer saying something at that moment that becomes, and with the simple insertion of that one word, becomes slightly more poignant as we have said it earlier. So we've looked at the big picture. Then we begin to dig a little deeper. For instance, I think that we have about a 4-bar introduction. And then we have a 2-bar sort of quasi-leading in of the choir. Now, I think one of the most important questions we can ask in this 8th section is, why? Why does he go, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Why 3 times? I don't have an answer to that. I have some thoughts about that. But as a conductor, as our choir sings, there has to be a sense of, this one is more important than that one. This is more important than that one. This one leads to this one, this leads to that one. They're not the same. Music is never the same. One note is not the same as the one before, the one after. They're all different. They're all inevitable. This note is inevitable because of what has happened with this one. And simply the repeat of those 3 passages, 3 repetitions of the text is very important. And the other side of that is, are they the same notes? I want to know that. I want to check that. Are they the same notes? The first 2 are, I believe. And the next one, the third one, the basses come in. Well, that's important to know. Because it would be nice to look at the basses there because they've been asleep. and I would love for that sound to be different. And there is a reason as a conductor, as we pace this performance, as we pace the communication of this text, there's a reason why the basses come in, and there's a reason, that's a new sonority that will make a difference to the congregation. Okay, now let's go a little bit further. Is it the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want? Or is it the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want? We have to decide, breath and breath, in the 3 presentations of that. And then he says, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Today is Thursday. Today is Thursday of the Week. That's what he's just done. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He could have just said, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. So as we look at this, as we analyze this, we have to think, why did he do that? And what can I say because he has done that? It can't be He maketh me to lie down. It has to be somehow. He maketh me to lie down. There has to be some different community development simply by how he's repeated that first fragment. Mozart does that all the time. Amen. Amen. There's a reason. I don't know what's exactly in Mozart's mind, but I know what I would like this text to say. Mozart does that all the time. Today is Thursday. Because today is Thursday in Waco. Okay? So he says, he maketh me to lie down. Now I would guarantee that most people in your choirs would like to go, he maketh me to lie down in. Why not? That's why I ran out of breath. That's why I should take a breath, for heaven's sakes. Come on. I can sing halfway through there. So we have to, as we imagine this, we might have to say, would you mark breath? And if the rules of the game are to breathe in commas, and everybody remembers the rules of the game, life is a little better. Down in repassion, and then he says it again, and then he does the same idea again. He leadeth me beside the still one. There's a reason, somehow, that he said still. I don't think it does that in Psalm 23. So why here? And what does he want to do with that? So as we analyze these phrases and figure out how long each of these phrases are, still, or you want still water. We have that's a decision that we make in this imagination process. And then he says, he restoreth my soul. That feels to me a little like a very short little phrase. He restoreth my soul. And then we start, he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his. And is there a reason? There's no comma there, there's no breath or not. So as we figure out this phrase, that's a 5-bar phrase, according to the way I measure it. If there are 40 people in this room, there are 40 different ways to not analyze this, and every one of them is valid. All right? But I imagine that last, if you start in 29, would you start in 29 and 30? So if we sing, he leadeth me, that's a 5-bar phrase, which is relatively unusual. It feels wrong. It feels a little off kilter. I would probably not do it right if I hadn't thought, well, that's a 5-bar phrase. Then we have to decide, are those 2 bars at the end of the page, top of 7? Are they part of what we've done, or are they part of what comes before, what's coming out? Whether you actually put that into words or not, I'm not sure that that is so important as that you make sure that the music moves ahead to the end. Then he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Again, today is Thursday. Yea, though I walk. The intensification of the intensification is caused by repetition is not normal. We don't usually speak that way. Today. We say it again for a reason. And the composer's doing it. And how does he match it with text? How does he match it with musical language? How does he match it with dynamics? How does he match it with articulation? How does he match it with musical expression? That's what we do when we analyze music and develop our imagination. So, we tell stories. And that's as far as I'm going to go. As far as I'm going to go. I've been affected. In our analyzing, we apply what we imagine then to the rehearsals coming up, and that's what we'll do this afternoon. So, imagine. Improvise, lead rehearsals that are spontaneous, they're efficient, but productive, based on our imagination of the score. And then inspire to tell a story. The Lord is my shepherd. Just call it a little bit. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. There's an image that we can